So let's talk through those front pages and some of the stories inside the papers with Stig Abell and Julia Hartley-Brewer. Good to see you both. We're going to talk about the story that's just emerged in the last few hours. This is the news that David Miliband is going to quit politics. And this is the inside of the Daily Mail. They call it humiliation for Ed as David Miliband quits.
Yes, I'm not quite sure how they managed to come up with that. Just a nice big bank balance for David, I think. I mean, the reality is, if we look at it from Ed Miliband's point of view, it's you know, he's got David Miliband, his big brother, sort of breathing down his neck.
The better looking one.
Yeah, the better looking one, the more talented, the one the one that the other MPs wanted. Remember, obviously, Ed Miliband only won the leadership, but with the union votes, didn't get the majority of Labour Party members or Labour MPs or the Labour shadow cabinet at the time. You can understand why it would actually be quite a good thing for Ed Miliband to have David off the scene, abroad, or out of the way. But for David Miliband, I think it's a really obvious move as well. What are we looking at? You know, another 2 years on the backbenches, on your backbench salary, which is, of course, not all he's earning at the moment. He's been earning, apparently, in the region of about £900,000 in the last couple of years, doing speeches and the like, an advisory role. But he knows that Ed Miliband, realistically, isn't going to lose the leadership before the next election. And he knows that he's not going to be Labour leader in the next few years. Well, what's the point of staying around?
Just to explain the humiliation for Ed, I've just spotted in the third paragraph, it says his decision will be seen as a massive vote of no confidence in his brother's ability to lead Labour. That's their
You could actually argue
argument.
the exact opposite. You could argue that he thinks that Ed Miliband's going to stay, Ed Miliband's ahead in the polls.
And if you speak to some Labour guys, Labour thinkers, they were saying that one of the problems of British politics at the minute, there's no narratives, there's no great stories, there's no great sort of iconic figures. And one of their little hidden solutions was going to be presenting to the electorate the brothers reunited, David and Ed as a kind of dream ticket. And they were talking vaguely about that even for 2015, the notion that he could provide a narrative to Ed Miliband, who's not a popular figure, he's a weak guy who they don't really buy, and they wonder if he's going to be the next Kinnock, who's not going to quite convince the British electorate to vote for him. And so one of the solutions that they were bandying around, apparently, was maybe David and Ed, brothers in arms together, would give them a bit of oomph. And of course, that's gone now. I mean, I personally kind of thought he'd quit politics a while ago. And you know, he makes his money, he makes £1 million, going around the world, basically trading off his role as foreign secretary. That's a great job to have. If you're foreign secretary, once Americans love it, you talk to think tanks, go to Harvard and go to the big West Coast universities as well and talk about international politics. That's a huge industry in America where he's clearly established himself, and he's off to do his dream job, which is working for a charity in New York. So I could see why it's in it for him, and maybe for Labour it's a bit of a blow because there's not a sexy storyline on its way for them.
But it's the idea that I do find it strange. I've met David Miliband a number of times, interviewed him at quite a lot of length a number of times. He's a really clever, charming guy who's obviously very talented. But the idea that he is this sort of great white hope of the Labour Party, that he is this, you know, uber charismatic figure on the right of, you know, the Blairite side of the party, it's just a nonsense. He's not. He's actually rather robotic. He's, again, perfectly nice. He's certainly, I think, got more leadership sort of about him, more oomph about him than his younger brother, Ed.
He's sort of the acceptable face of Miliband.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
kind of people, and when you see that, that's probably quite a questionable statement in itself. But people feel that genuinely Ed Miliband is a clever, thoughtful guy, but people don't warm to him. And the notion is that David is a slightly better version.
He's got more gravitas. He's got, especially having been Foreign Secretary as well, I think, for those 3 years. But again, I just don't think that he is this great white hope, and this is a big you know, dashing disappointment for the party.
But do you feel that it's possible that he thinks, well, obviously I can't work within the Labour Party in a significant role while my brother's leading it, but doesn't necessarily rule out a return in the future? I mean, or do you really think this is the end of his political career?
Well, I don't think it does mean that it's the end. I think that this is a good time to get out of British politics. I mean, one thing you can make an argument, the next 5-10 years even, we're heading to a world of coalition, a world of quite ramshackle politicking, where no one is going to seize the political initiative, where the next government, which is probably going to be a Lib-Lab coalition, if you look at it, most likely, that's going to be a fairly difficult place as we start to emerge from recovery. It's not a bad time not to be in British politics. Going off to America, earning some money, doing what you're interested in, actually seems rather attractive.
There are always opportunities. I mean, if you look at people like Michael Portillo, and I know that Lord Mandelson has been quoted tonight as saying, well, look, everyone thought it was the end for me. You know, he was the comeback kid, kept coming back. Yes, he could come back in that sort of role, but I think that's very different to come back maybe as Lord Miliband one day and take on some sort of senior role in a Labour government. But my guess is he's had that little taste of the big money and the glamour and the private jets, and frankly, I think he rather likes it.
OK, let's move on to another issue that is on the front of the Daily Telegraph tomorrow morning. Again, actually, it's been not the first time that they've focused on stay-at-home mothers and what they see as unfairness in the system. This is about traditional families with one stay-at-home or a stay-at-home mother they're talking about, isn't it, are actually financially worse off.
Well, it's an OECD report, and bear in mind, I haven't got my glasses on. It's very small point.
Anna, could you just read out the story?
Read out the whole story for me. Yeah, we'll put it
I've done enough reading tonight.
But you see the second paragraph there. It's saying the average family with one worker and two children loses 27.9% of their wages in tax, compared with 26.2% before the coalition was elected. I mean, I'm sorry, but big deal is they're talking about penalising stay-at-home mums, punishing stay-at-home mums. What it is that they're not allowing people who aren't working to get their tax benefits rolled in with their husband usually or working wife's tax situation. I'm utterly perplexed as a working mum, and this has come up ever since a stay-at-home mum confronted Nick Clegg on an LBC phone-in on my radio station.
Your colleague, Nick Clegg.
My colleague Nick Clegg, yes, on Cool Clegg. But I'm absolutely bemused and perplexed by this whole idea that stay-at-home mums are being punished in some way.
Well, they point out that single people and two-earner couples have seen their tax bills fall, and there is a sense, isn't there, that women that stay at home to look after their children, and I guess
who can afford to stay at home and look after their children,
feel that somehow their job is not considered of worth to this government.
And this is a classic time where you see how much the Daily Telegraph is like the Daily Mail these days. This is an absolute male Telegraph story. Yeah. They firmly believe they're standing up for family values. And actually, what's happened with the coalition government under Cameron is all about strivers and the working and the workers, and that's what he's trying to do to get growth. And a lot of traditional Conservatives feel that he's abandoned them on traditional Conservative values. Gay marriage is a classic example of that. And I think what the Telegraph are trying to articulate, and the Mail do this as well, is this is another example of a policy you'd expect to be warmly embraced by a Conservative Prime Minister, fostering good, strong families, which is how they see it. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that's certainly how they see it. And they would regard a Conservative government should be supportive of that.
But he completely ignores the fact that sort of something like 7 out of 10 mums with young children who work say they would rather not work. They simply can't afford not to. And whether or not you get some nuance on the tax of a few percent here and there, that's not the difference between whether they can stay at home or can't stay at home. There was an attack. I say, stay-at-home mums were being under attack because they weren't going to get help with childcare costs last week. But you don't need help with childcare costs. You are the childcare costs. If you think it's important that you are valued, get your husband to pay you to stay at home. If that's your issue, ask your husband to pay you a whack of his salary, and then you're saying you're valued. But we're constantly told that stay-at-home mums who choose not to earn a salary want in some way to be financially recognised.
What those stay-at-home mothers are saying is that the people that go back to work are being financially rewarded, and I'm not being recognised. And they say that's unfair.
Yes, because someone is saying their work is a value. If they think their work is a value, and I agree that it is, I'm not under any illusion that it's easier to be at home with 3 toddlers than it is to go out to work. Of course not. But then who do you want to pay you to do that? Given that most mums are out working, they don't want to be. Most mums with young children would rather be at home, but they can't afford to. So what, we're supposed to financially reward the women who can afford to stay at home with their children? I think that's an absurdity.
Steve, what do you think?
But I think that the argument against that would be people feel that is something that the state should intervene in to enable.
Because we've got so much money. Let's pay all the middle-class stay-at-home mums to stay at home, shall we?
But this is a story that rides boom and bust. I mean, that's why the Telegraph put it on the front page, the Mail put it on the front page, because to them it speaks to something broader, which is about family values. You know, the great Tory clarion cry that's always been, and so they feel. But I mean, you're right. And these days, and David Cameron would say this, priorities are different. You've got to try and get Britain moving again, and things that he may even like to do are no longer on the table. But it won't stop the traditional right-wing press with that very sort of middle Britain family values hitting out.
But
on
a
stuff like that.
completely outdated vision of the family,
Well,
unfortunately.
I think that's probably right.
OK, let's move on to a terribly sad story that we've been talking about here on Sky News tonight. And this is the girl who appears to have been attacked by dogs in Atherton today. Jade Lomas Anderson, her touching picture there on the front of the Daily Mail.
I mean, it's just horrible. I've got a 6-year-old. All the grandparents have dogs, and it's a real concern. My mother's dog's from a rescue home, and we can't leave her alone because we just don't know what that dog has been through, and could there be risk? By all accounts, and again, as you say, we don't know for sure. There were 4 or 5 dogs in the house. That she was found dead. She'd arrived, apparently, what eyewitnesses said, with food at the house, her friend's house, and was attacked. 4 of those dogs have now been shot. Have been put down. I mean, it's just an absolute tragedy. But again, we don't know for sure what the dogs were. But neighbours said they were Staffordshire Bull Terriers and Mastiffs. And again and again, if you ask if a child has been mauled or worse in this scenario, killed, it's invariably one of these dogs. And I don't know if it's the dogs. I don't know if it's the dogs, the type, the style of them, or if it is the sort of people who keep these dogs and the training that goes into these dogs and how they're kept and how they're expected to behave.
But the real question is why this happened. I mean, you must have seen this. This story comes up how often? Once a year?
Once a year, about every 3 or 4 months, unfortunately.
More frequently than that, where you have these terribly sad pictures of innocent children who go into environments which should be controlled to some extent. You've got to find a way of, I mean, dogs are supposed to be subjugated. That's the whole point of dogs. They're bred to do that. And yet, we had the Dangerous Dogs Act that came through, and there are various attempts to put restrictions on this. And yet, every 3 or 4 months or every year, we seem to be looking at another picture of a sad child who's been attacked in some way.
And again, we don't know the circumstances of this case, and I think there are.
Well, there's a child and there were dogs, and there's a child that's dead.
Yeah.
We know enough of the circumstances, but we'll be inundated with questions and tweets. I know on my LBC show tomorrow from people saying, but it's not the dogs, it's the owners. But you know what? And I keep being told, oh, it's Labradors that are most responsible for attacks on children. But I've never yet read of an attack on a child that's in the papers like this that's involved a Labrador.
OK, let's move on to an issue, again, a big story today about trying to right the wrongs in the NHS post-Stafford. Here's Jeremy Harton picture to here in the Daily Express.
And it's the response to the Francis report. And it's interesting, actually, because if you think of Hunt, you're associated with the media, and of course the Leveson report came up, and the government have immediately shackled themselves to the notion of making everything Leveson compliant. Everything that Leveson put in his vast, unread tome, they would agree to. And yet the Francis report, which arguably deals with something far more serious, which is the deaths of 2,000 people in a hospital care, they've not shackled themselves to that notion. They are willing to pick and choose from the menu of all the things he said. And what's happening today is he's come out with an initial response. It's not entirely clear. He's not answered point by point. But he's not taking forward some of the recommendations, and some of the patient groups are saying that's not good enough. But he wants to try and create a culture of compassion and zero tolerance for a lack of compassionate care. And he started to spell it out. But this will run and run because it's a very long report and there's lots more recommendations to follow.
It does seem strange that you need to say, we need to have compassion and we should have a zero tolerance to harm to patients. I sort of feel that if you have to even say that out loud, it's kind of already too late, and things are going wrong.
It's hard to legislate for. I mean,
well, that's right, and it's hard to change the culture of such a massive organisation if there is a real problem.
But I would have thought the first thing you need to do is start sacking some people. I would have thought one of the issues actually is in a hospital where you've got someone who's actually not compassionate and really doesn't care and doesn't really think it's their job to feed a little old lady who's unable to feed herself, and therefore is one of the people who may have been the vulnerable patients who died. I think those what happens is you've got a good ward sister, you've got good other nurses, and they'll gradually push that person out. That person will end up on a ward where no one really cares. And so we heard in all of these hospitals where there have been problems, and it wasn't just Mid Staffordshire, that some wards are fine and some wards are bad. And the bad people all get pushed onto the same wards. Those people shouldn't be pushed to another ward. They should be sacked. They should be sacked on the spot. But no one gets sacked. It's like teachers. Bad teachers don't get sacked either. We need to start having a little bit more zero tolerance when it comes to the staff, as opposed to what the staff do.
And the Mail would say that should start at the top. I mean, their campaign is that David Nicholson, who was on his watch, is now head of the NHS, and one of their things they keep beating the drum at is that he should go. And this will be fuel for that as well.
Indeed.
OK, we're going to take a pause at that point, but don't go away because we're going to look at lots more stories after the break, including why the UK government has had to set up a new secret headquarters.